You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
Welcome to Women's Media Center Live. I'm Robin Morgan. Although I've lived for certain protracted periods in the country, the real country, once notably in New Zealand on a farm, I am undeniably and deeply a city girl. Specifically a New York City girl, I admit it. More about that later, but for now it will serve at least to partly explain why this week we're focusing on cities. The United States has always contained an internal dichotomy, the cosmopolitan versus the frontier mentalities, urban versus rural, and everything that's come to stand for, east versus west, and both versus, now, flyover middle for that matter. This has uniquely shaped people's lives in our republic because it's been there from the very beginning. For every city dweller like Ben Franklin among the Constitution's framers, there were 5 more farmers and plantation owners. Even otherwise urban John Adams had a farm. So this republic was formed largely as an agrarian country, and therein lies the tale that has informed our culture and our politics ever since. It is a tale that is about to radically change. We're going to talk about all that and more, and the fallout for generations to come. But first, we need to go inside the headlines. Something is happening in this country, something that was actually beginning earlier and gradually, but which has been precipitated by COVID and by the changes demanded by COVID. It's not unlike the historic, even seismic changes wrought on society by plagues and pestilence in the past. We've discussed that on this program, as when the Black Plague decimated the population of Europe in the Middle Ages and left the entire feudal system collapsed utterly in its wake, since serfs grasped that they could be freer and economically independent by continuing to do the same work they'd always done for the Lord, but by leaving feudal estates and becoming tailors, blacksmiths, weavers, and so forth. Well, this time the tremendous social change specifically has to do with cities. City life has changed forever in this country and will continue to change even more drastically. And it's not even the gender gap. It's the density gap. As Tim Wallace and Krishna Kaur wrote in the New York Times last year, the pattern we observe here is consistent with the urban-rural divide we're accustomed to seeing on traditional maps of election results. What spans the divide, the suburbs represented by transition colors in their grid, can be crucial to winning elections. It is part of why Trump, seeking to appeal to swing voters, has portrayed the suburbs as under siege and menaced by crime. But the suburbs are neither politically nor geographically monolithic. They are where Democratic and Republican voters meet and overlap in a variety of ways. At each extreme of the political spectrum, the most Democratic areas tend to be heavily developed, while the most Republican areas are a more varied mix, not only suburbs, but farms and forests, as well as lands dominated by rock, sand, or clay. Period. Close quote. You know, like Arizona, New Mexico, etc. Well, the New York Times has also run a series of articles that break down the 2020 election to try and discover what the singular demographic understanding of that election might be. The answer is density. Districts that have less than 50 people per square mile are overwhelmingly red and GOP. But districts with more than 50 people per square mile are overwhelmingly blue and Democratic. Against this grid, it doesn't really matter whether the voters are white, black or brown. It doesn't matter if they're male or female, college educated or not, how much money they make, or how old or young they are. It has to do with how many people you live around. Now, compare that with what is supposedly the big story. How many electoral votes and congressional seats have been lost or gained by states? The real story, the real big story, is that of the family that, say, moved from Brooklyn to the Hudson Valley suburbs in New York. They're moving into an area that was previously GOP red, but they're bringing their progressive values with them as they gradually densify the area. In Arizona, in Texas, all over the Southwest, previous hardcore urbanites are resettling and importing their values as well. Furthermore, the vast amount of people who move do so intrastate, moving between 30 and 50 miles away. This means that people from Dallas, which is bluer, move to outside of Dallas, which is red, and begin to turn those suburbs purple. And where does the pandemic fit into all this, you ask? Well, if you can shop online and have stuff delivered, why go to the store and schlep packages home? We have been taken over by remote retail, remote education, remote medicine, and most of all, remote jobs. Kids still need to go to school because without that the economy falls apart. That's a reality, by the way, that should teach us something about the importance of women's work in childcare all the time. But once kids are in school, back in school, parents need no longer homeschool. They can work remotely, and the family can live anywhere. Moreover, there's more leisure time available to them, which changes the society as well. And it's less costly all around. If there's no need for people to be in office buildings, why, what do you do with all that huge, costly real estate? Affordable housing is one answer. If major chains leave the big cities, as they're already doing, what takes their place? Well, smaller businesses, most of which are women-owned in this country, fill that vacuum. In this nation, at least, there are almost no corners into which this change won't somehow reach. That's less true for poorer countries where there isn't the same internet access, where there's much more manual labor, and where the population still lives in grinding poverty. But the ripple effects will be felt even there. And here, those effects will take the form of economic, social, political, and even psychological earthquakes. Take, for example, the Electoral College, that bone in the throat for so many of us, which was created by the framers deliberately for a balance, so they thought, between the power of land and that of people. This is why a cow in Montana has more votes than entire cities in California. When the nation was envisaged as agrarian, landowners needed representation. That was also pretty convenient for the framers. But unfortunately, as time passed, they got greedy and overstepped their bounds, so that the minority has for quite a while been virtually ruling the majority, which the framers most decidedly did not want. But this new trend will affect the Electoral College, too. Everything will shift. Some things rapidly, some gradually, some things already have shifted. No event in U.S. history has so shaped how city life will be. It's time for our first break, but we'll be back in just a moment with the Surrealism Corner, and a very different Surrealism Corner this week at that. Subscribe to this program on your favorite podcast platform and leave us a review. Follow us on Twitter at WMC Live, like our Facebook page at facebook.com/WMC Live, and visit us at WMCLive.com for more information about our show and our guests.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
Since human beings are social animals, the history of cities requires going deeper and deeper still, which, this week, happens to land us in the surrealism corner. Cities have a very long history, although historians differ on which ancient settlements qualify as true cities. A settlement has its benefits, of course: reduced transport costs, the exchange of ideas, a sharing of natural resources, large local markets, and, with time, in some cases, such amenities as sewage disposal and running water. Possible costs include higher rate of crime and mortality rates, higher cost of living, pollution, traffic, and commuting times. Cities flourish where the benefits of proximity are higher than the cost. Most historians believe that the first cities formed after the Neolithic Revolution, which brought agriculture, made denser human populations possible, and supported the development of urban areas. It's unclear whether farming replaced foraging or the reverse. Historians differ. But the increased food production per unit of land supported higher population density. The first real towns are sometimes considered large settlements, where the inhabitants were no longer simply farmers of the surrounding area, but began to take on specialized occupations, and where trade, food storage, and power were centralized. In 1950, Gordon Childe attempted to define a historic city with 10 general metrics. These are: 1. The size and density of the population should be above normal. 2. Differentiation of the population. Not all residents grow their own food, leading to specialists. 3. Payment of taxes to a deity or king. 4. Monumental public buildings. 5. Those not producing their own food are supported by the king. 6. Systems of recording and practical science. 7. A system of writing. 8. Development of symbolic art. 9. Trade and import of raw materials. And 10. Specialists, craftsmen from outside the kin group. Now, not all ancient cities have every single one of these characteristics, but the categorization itself is descriptive. The more complex human societies, called the first civilizations, emerged around 3000 BCE in the river valleys of Mesopotamia, Minos, India, China, and Egypt. The earliest known city is Çatalhöyük, a settlement of some 10,000 people in southern Anatolia, now Turkey, that existed from approximately 7100 BCE to 5700 CE. Hunting, agriculture, and the domestication of animals all played a role in the society of Çatalhöyük. The Indus Valley civilization and ancient China are two other areas with major indigenous urban traditions. China's planned cities date to the turn of the second millennium BCE. City-states emerging at this time used geomancy to locate and plan cities, orienting their walls to cardinal points. Symbolic cities were constructed as celestial microcosms, with the central point corresponding to the pole star, representing harmony and connection between the earthly and other realms. In Chang'an, the imperial palace lay to the north, facing south, absorbing the light of the sun, and royalty slept with their heads to the north and their feet to the south. Next came the imperial city, and then the people's city, divided into eastern and western halves. An aside. Is that surreal enough for you? Beginning in the early first millennium, independent city-states in Greece began to flourish, evolving the notion of citizenship, becoming in the process the archetype of the free city, the polis. Ancient Mesopotamia, the area of the Tigris and Euphrates within modern-day Iraq and Syria, was home to numerous cities by the 3rd millennium BCE. The rise of Rome again shifted the locus of political power, resulting in economic and demographic gain for the city of Rome itself, and a whole new political regime in the form of the Roman Empire. Meanwhile, in the New World and the Global South, agriculture was practiced in sub-Saharan Africa since the 3rd millennium BCE. Because of this, cities could develop as centers of non-agricultural activity, well before the influence of Arab urban culture. One of the oldest sites documented thus far, Gene in what is today Mali, has been dated to the 3rd century BCE. According to some historians, Gene did not fit into traditional Western conceptions of urbanity, as it lacked monumental architecture and a distinctive elite social class. It was more, equal. But it should very much be considered a city, nonetheless, based on a functional redefinition of urban development. In particular, Gene featured settlement mounds arranged according to a horizontal rather than vertical power hierarchy, and it served as a center of specialized production and exhibited functional interdependence with the surrounding hinterland. Archaeological evidence from Gene, specifically the presence of non-Western African glass beads, dated from the 3rd century BCE to the 4th century CE, and indicate that pre-Arabic trade contacts probably existed between Gene and North Africa. Additionally, other early urban centers in sub-Saharan Africa, dated to around 500 CE, include the ancient capital of Ghana and Maranda, a center located on a trade route between Egypt and Gao. In Mesoamerica, the ancient Americas, early urban traditions developed in the Andes. The first urban centers developed in the Norte Chico civilization, also termed the Caral or the Caral Supe civilization, and in the Chavin and Moche cultures, followed by major cities in the Huari, Chimu, and Inca cultures. The Norte Chico civilization included as many as 30 major population centers in what is now the Norte Chico region of north-central coastal Peru. It is the oldest known civilization in the Americas, flourishing between the 30th century BCE and the 18th century CE. Mesoamerica saw the rise of early urbanism in several cultural regions, including the pre-classic Maya, the Zapotec of Oaxaca, and Teotihuacan in central Mexico. Later cultures, such as the Aztec, drew on these earlier urban traditions. Teotihuacan, flourishing from 200 BCE to CE 750, was the largest American city of the pre-Columbian era, possibly reaching a population of 125,000 in CE 200. The city's grid plan originated with the Avenue of the Dead, connecting the Temple of the Feathered Serpent and the Pyramid of the Moon. They certainly had great names for their streets and avenues in those days. But this exploration into antiquity is all we have time for right now, and it brings us up to merely very, very old times, not ancient ones. The point is, we are social animals, needing one another for survival, company, and comfort. And cities have always met that need, coming into existence, like the universe itself, out of nothingness, and retaining sufficient plasticity to continue transforming themselves and us, which is both surreal and very, very real. Time for for another short break, but we'll be back directly with some fighting words. The Women's Media Center, founded in 2005 by Jane Fonda, Gloria Steinem, and myself, is a progressive, nonpartisan, nonprofit organization working to make women visible and powerful in media. You can learn more about the WMC at womensmediacenter.com.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
A macrocosm contains fighting words, and so does a microcosm. We've glanced at the macrocosm, the historic arc of cities down through time, gliding swiftly from Çatalhöyük to the great civilizations of Mesoamerica and of sub-Saharan Africa. They've ranged from the hierarchically structured rankings of Mesoamerica to the more egalitarian ones of sub-Saharan Africa. The latter reveal quite different forms of social organization during our origins as city folk, and could constitute newer models for urbanization, more horizontal ones, less those of vertical inequality. But as I promised you at the beginning of the program, we also need to look at the microcosm, and the microcosm is the individual city dweller. The city dweller, in this case, I confess, is me. In the year 2000, a sizable majority of Americans, 58%, lived in metropolitan areas with populations of more than 1 million people. 2/3 of us live in metro areas with more than 500,000 people. Even if it was not becoming less possible to find countryside in which to live, living in the country, while possessing its own great charms, has less and less of a future. I certainly don't want to offend those listeners who choose this as their life, since it has glories as well as hardships. I used to take my watch off and leave it off after arriving for a stay at the farm, because we rose with the light and tended to go to bed not that long after dark. And what a dark it was, punctured by no pools of city streetlight, only a black velvet viscous density against which the stars seemed quite within reach of an outstretched arm. The dawns were pure splendor, pale peach light deepening as it leaked across the land and dusted away the shadows, farm animals peacefully bleating and mooing, birds chittering so loudly no alarm clocks were ever needed. Sure, in winter it was cold, but heaters and blankets largely did the trick, and crackling fires in the hearth made it all tolerable. One's time was one's own. There was no urgent rising to have to catch the subway and get to work on time, no sloshing through icy puddles bent double by the wind. One could take one's time, make one's rounds, check on the animals, and then sit down to eat a hearty farm breakfast. Each of the other seasons brought its own distinct flavor, texture, and color, too. They didn't blend into one as city life tends to. Summer was a festival of ripeness, haying and picking, jam-making, preserving, and lazing. Autumn was a glorious riot of color and crispness, a harvest, and much animal tending like shearing the sheep and goats. Spring was a heartbreak of beauty. Little plum trees in blossom, cherry, apple, pear trees ripening and dropping their fruit with a wanton largesse beyond one's ability to gather it in. The silence was truly silent, unbroken by car horns and train whistles, profound. There was planting time. In other seasons there was tupping time, putting the rams in with the does. Except for the dead of winter, these were all busy times, making for working days that, although they might have been short on rest, somehow seemed long on leisure. Everything proceeded at its natural pace, and one came to respect that, drifting along with it. It also must be said, though, because this is true too in the United States and elsewhere in comparatively rural communities, that the isolation and insularity could feel tyrannical, and the other side of silence, withholding and repression, could be suffocating. Now, others' experience may well differ from mine, but statistics, for example, in the United States tell the same story. So-called flyover country, for example, contains what's called the buckle of the Bible Belt, those 5 states where the rates of domestic violence are the highest in the nation. Not only are laconic verbal exchanges, yups and nopes, more common in rural areas, but legislation has proven harder to pass regarding reproductive rights, women's rights, lesbian and gay rights, and other progressive measures. Without question, there is an exchange of ideas, excitement, and pace that cities bestow on individuals that's lacking in the country, which is not to say that books and other cultural means of exchange are absent there, although in some cases they might be harder to come by. But there seems to have developed a sort of culture of withholding emotion, communication, excitement, as if they weren't renewable resources. It's as if the isolation and insularity breed, or do they perhaps stem from, a uniformity that itself brooks little difference, whether in gender, skin color, sexuality, or even temperament. Country life and small towns share this proclivity. Everyone knows everything about everybody, and no one wants anything to change much. There is a suspicion about feeling things too deeply, as if that were somehow distasteful bad manners, sophisticated preening, or some kind of exhibitionism. There's a hoarding of emotion as if it were going out of style. Where does this come from? It often seems to cover feelings of inadequacy, of inferiority, say against city elites, which soon translates into grudge-holding resentment against eggheads and intellectuals and other hapless urbanites like the financially less secure black and brown communities also used as a source for dislike of urbanity, and never mind the contradictions there. We saw that kind of grudge-holding on the 6th of January in the assault on Congress. One can understand why young people and rebels tend to flock to cities, abandoning family farms and entire ways of life that have existed for generations. They say that ontology recapitulates phylogeny, and it does seem as if in the microcosm, generations are repeating the macrocosm, the migrations from isolated kin groups to an approximation of city life. To the country dweller, of course, it can appear as if the city visitor is a gushing avalanche of feeling, over-expressiveness, and manic energy. Knowing this as I do, and appreciating both sides of the discussion, I've nonetheless been extremely grateful to return each time to Manhattan, where people actually communicated their thoughts and feelings without shame or parsimony. I'm aware of being tremendously fortunate in having a small garden in the city, so I can feel the breeze and care for greening things and celebrate hearing the dawn chorus, though it's a rare night on which I can see the stars. But I'm so lucky to be able to feel the change of seasons, to relish the snow or the sun or the rain on my head. At times, to be sure, I long for the simple quiet of an alternative existence, away from the hurly-burly, the traffic noise, the babble. But how I do love it, that on any given city street one passes at least 4 different patinas of skin color and can hear at least 3 or 4 different languages or accents, just as a matter of course. It feels as if the world is my neighborhood. It isn't surprising, then, that progressive movements have largely sprung almost totally from cities. The crowding itself produces them. The sharing creates tolerance. Nor is it surprising that art flourishes here, as does science. When rising early in the city, I often think of the great Wordsworth poem, a Petrarchan sonnet composed on Westminster Bridge, written September 3rd, 1802. It goes like this. Earth has not anything to show more fair. Dull would he be of soul who could pass by a sight so touching in its majesty. This city now doth like a garment wear the beauty of the morning, silent, bare, ships, towers, domes, theaters, and temples lie open to the fields and to the sky, all bright and glittering in the smokeless air. Never did sun more beautifully steep in his first splendor, valley, rock, or hill. Ne'er saw I, never felt a calm so deep. The river glideth at his own sweet will. Dear God, the very houses seem asleep, and all that mighty heart is lying still. And all that mighty heart is lying still indeed. If our social loving species can emerge from this massive pandemic's griefs with transformative adaptations that liberalize our politics, reduce our travel, thus helping the planet itself, humanize our home lives, civilize our workforces, and generally address the sexist, racist, ageist, and other inequities in our lives, that will be an unintended but beneficent consequence, for certain. Keep an eye out for it. Those are my fighting words. Add yours on Twitter, and remember to tag us at WMC Live and use the hashtag Fighting Words. And that's our show for this week. You can follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and now Instagram at The Robin Morgan, and you can check out my blog at robinmorgan.net and find my latest book of poems, Dark Matter, and my brand new novel, Parallax, wherever books are sold. Opinions expressed on this program do not necessarily represent the Women's Media Center. Here's the family for Women's Media Center Live. Executive producer as well as founding and sustaining sponsor Regina K. Scully, WMC president and co-executive producer of this program Julie Burton. I'm Robin Morgan, your producer and host. Thank you for being with us. Join us again next time on Women's Media Center Live.